Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Krupinski. I'm the marketing director at Michigan Radio. I want to thank you for joining us for tonight's Issues and Ale discussion. If this is your first time at an Issues and Ale, this is a discussion series that we sponsor at Michigan Radio designed to engage people in conversations about important issues facing Michigan. And I would dare say that there are probably few things more important to our state and our nation right now than the upcoming election. So we invite you to sit back with a beer or the beverage of your choice and enjoy our discussion. A couple quick announcements before we get started. And speaking of discussions, I do want to let you know that I hope you'll check out our brand new Stateside podcast, which premieres this coming Monday. Every weekday, you'll get conversations that matter to Michigan in a new format that brings what's important into focus. So you can subscribe to our brand new Stateside podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, or find out more at michiganradio.org. We are recording tonight's event, and we should have the recording available at the Michigan Radio website within 24 hours. If you want to share that with others, or there are pearls of wisdom you missed the first time around and you want to listen to those again, you'll be able to do that by checking out our recording. So the audience tonight is muted during the event, but we will be taking your questions. We had some that were submitted in advance, but if you have a question, you can submit those during the event using the Q&A box. Just type those in, and we will try to answer as many of those questions as we can. So our host tonight is Zoe Clark. Zoe is Michigan Radio's program director and our resident political junkie. You can often hear her giving her political analysis on Michigan Radio's Stateside show, as well as on Public TV's Off the Record program, on CNN, and numerous other places she pops up. So without further ado, here's Zoe Clark.
Hi, everyone. It's so good I'm pretending I get to see all of you. And I'm getting text messages from the golden god himself, Rusty Brock, who handles all of our IT. He is actually making sure this evening happens. And I've been told to say what a wonderful human being he is, because he has just let me know that he can change our titles on this Zoom. So Rusty, we are forever grateful for you. In all seriousness, no, I am incredibly excited to have this panel with us tonight. Incredibly smart, funny, wonderful people, and also great Pluto.
You beat me to it.
I know, I knew you were going to do it. I could just see it in your eyes. So we have Kathy Gray, correspondent with the New York Times, just recently with the New York Times, and you probably have read her also from the Detroit Free Press, but it's so wonderful to see her byline in the New York Times, giving a voice to all these really important Michigan election issues now across the country and around the world. Chad Livengood, who is senior editor at Crane's Detroit Business. I don't actually know how he is looking into the camera right now, because he is most likely writing some column that is going to break news in an hour. It'll come out in 45 minutes and he will have written it during this. That is how prolific he is. And then Rick Pluta, who is the Capitol Bureau Chief for the Michigan Public Radio Network. You will have heard him on Michigan Radio and all public radio stations across the state. Happens to also, as of now, 10 days, be my husband.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So
wait, me, right?
Yeah,
you were
absolutely.
there too. So as Steve Krupinski said, there is the question and answer. As you can tell, we will all continue to talk and talk and talk. So please put in the questions that you have. If you don't hear me ask them in real time when you write them, have no fear. I'm trying to somewhat organize so it's not a complete chaos of going from topic to topic, although if we're being honest, probably after the second beer, that will happen anyway. But first, I have to start because I think what everyone is on the edge and their seats is we have a lot of congressional races. We have a U.S. Senate race. We have House races here in the state that could determine control of one chamber in Michigan. But really, what we are all talking about and probably thinking about and possibly tweeting about is the race for presidency. Kathy, I want to start with you, being at that kind of national view, but looking specifically at Michigan. Where do you see the race for president being now less than 2 weeks away?
Well, Joe Biden has hung on to a fairly substantial lead outside of the margin of error throughout the election cycle, not the election cycle, but since the COVID crisis hit. And he's been at anywhere between 6 to 8 to 10 to 11 points. And Fox News came out with a poll today that has him up 12. Now, I don't think that he's up 12 in Michigan, but he certainly seems to be in a good position. But you know what? We know what happened in 2016, where Hillary Clinton had a fairly substantial lead that dwindled in the final weeks, but she ended up losing. So, I'm certainly not going to make any predictions.
Chad, same question to you, prediction or no, less than 2 weeks. Where do you see this race for presidency?
I definitely got out of the predictions business in 2016. Just a little bit of sort of scene setter history right now. In the 16 election, Hillary Clinton didn't go west of US 23 until the day before the election. She went out to Allendale, try to shore up some base out there because they saw some problems in their numbers in Kent County and in Ottawa County, even though it's traditionally a Republican area. Kent County has been increasingly becoming more and more of a stronghold for Democrats in the city of Grand Rapids. And it's just in general a bellwether county that is predicting elections more and more. You saw Joe Biden out in West Michigan. You see Kamala Harris is getting outside of Metro Detroit. I mean, so there are signs that people are taking this race elsewhere. The other day, Pete Buttigieg was in Stockbridge, of all places, campaigning and for Joe Biden. Tomorrow, the vice president's coming to West Michigan, or is it Oakland County? I'm losing track.
Oakland County.
Oakland County.
He already was in West Michigan. And then Donald Trump Jr. is flying into Houghton County. I mean, talk about taking this race to all corners of the state. Never even sort of heard of a high-profile surrogate heading into to the Calumet airport, or the Houghton County Airport in Calumet, which is 4 hours from the Green Bay and 4 hours from the Duluth media market. So it's not exactly
Another swing state.
Yeah.
well, not exactly a strategic spot to try to get play in both states. But why they didn't go to Menominee, I don't understand. But anyways, this is how they are spread out and trying to. This is all a base vote, even though we're talking about north of 5.5, maybe up to 6 million people voting, in shattering the 2008 record of 5.2 million or so during Barack Obama's historic presidential election.
Yeah. Rick, same question to you.
There are, like everyone else, I will chicken out of making predictions, and for very good reason. But I think there's just an astonishing number of variables here that how important, how big a deal mail-in and drop-off voting is going to be here in Michigan, especially with the relatively new absentee, no reason absentee ballot law. That the race here was so close that concerns about COVID-19, that people who don't vote absentee, who don't drop off or mail in their ballots, and actually the Secretary of State is now saying don't even mail in your ballot. If you haven't voted yet, drop it off. But what are polling places going to be like? What's the atmosphere going to be like at the polling places? That Michigan was such a close election the last time around, and will likely be this time around, or well, I shouldn't say that's a bit much, but it's very possible that it will be this time around. That you look at any small segment of the voting or possible voting public, and that could be a difference, if not the difference, in this election.
Well, and we know from 4 years ago, of course, that Trump won Michigan by less than 11,000 votes. And in fact, some 70,000 voters turned in or, voted their ballots and just left that circle for presidency blank. Kathy, you had brought up sort of initially this idea of not wanting to predict. And I think for everyone that did make predictions, 2016 was a fair and right slap in the face. So I want to go to a question from Alex Hansen, who says, how much importance do you give Nate Silver's 538 projections? We should say East Lansing, born and raised after 2016's very crazy election results. Alex says, I am constantly refreshing it daily, but I'm very cautious after the 16 election. Kathy, again, talk to me a little bit about polls and how much weight you and the Times are putting behind them at this point.
Well, I'm not looking at national polls. I'm looking at the battleground state polls. And the national polls, you know, have Joe Biden up by a significant margin, but those are irrelevant. And it's really the states that you have to look at. And they've been kind of, like I said, they've been pretty consistent. There was one, a Republican outfit called Trafalgar that came out with one yesterday that has Trump up one in Michigan. And, you know, there's a lot of outliers out there. So, you know, I kind of take the highs and the lows and throw those out and then kind of look at the ones in the middle. And like I said, I try not to get too obsessed with polls. I was obsessed in 2016. Same thing, Real Clear Politics, 538. You know, the New York Times has been doing a lot of polling in battleground states, and I was just obsessed with those. And I've tried not to obsess so much about them this year.
Well, Kathy Ann Grove says, stop looking at the polls, exclamation point, just vote in all capital letters. So I think you and many folks are hearing that, Ann. Let's talk a little bit about which areas of the state. Chad, you started to talk a little bit about some of the places we're seeing candidates, but there has been a lot of attention, of course, on Macomb County always because of the Reagan Democrats. Kathy and Rick and I we were just talking about Oakland County and the changes, but I want to talk specifically here. The question is about Livingston County. Someone who says TW Bro says, I read that a GOP strategist said that the GOP's problem in Michigan is the demographic changes in Livingston County. Chad, can you discuss what's going on in Livingston County, or is this just more broadly what changes and happens when maps and electoral college maps and congressional district maps change?
Well, places like Howell and Brighton, the exurbs of Detroit now, are absorbing people coming out of Oakland County, and some of that is, some of them are old Republicans, and some of them are, you know, Democrats, and they're making some changes to those demographics. People are commuting. We're, you know, as a region, we've always been kind of continuously sprawling out, and that is changing the dynamics of things. Certainly, we have seen in Oakland County places like Troy that become really ethnic melting pot of diversity, and that has really greatly changed the electorate in general. And then what we saw in 2018 was the quote unquote pink wave of female voters who came out for female candidates, and that, you know, and so there's a couple things. One thing we go back to polling just for a second. The thing I look at closely is voter motivation, where they ask, pollster asks you between a score of 1 and 10, how motivated are you to vote? And both sides are just jacked. I mean, this number has been 9.8 for basically 12, even 18 months in some surveys, particularly with Democrats. But there's one that just jumps out at me about what issues are motivating people. Because if you haven't noticed, we haven't really talked about much on the issues standpoint in this election. We had one debate. We may have one tomorrow. You know, things change in 2020 every day, so who knows? But in the Detroit News WDIV poll they did a couple weeks ago, voters were asked what motivates you to vote, and preservation of the Affordable Care Act came in at 54%. Abortion was 16%. More than three and a half fold increase for preservation of the Affordable Care Act, which is going before the Supreme Court a week after the election. And so that's why you're seeing Democrats message on that right now. They know it is an issue that they can run on. Certainly Joe Biden, you know, big effing deal comment from Obama administration in the passage of the Affordable Care Act. he has certainly, got a hand in that, and as part of his legacy, it's part of his pitch. But I think that issue in a year that so many people have lost their health insurance because they've lost their jobs, that issue rings home downriver. It rings home in the suburbs of Oakland County, and it also rings home in Macomb County. And that's where, if Trump won Macomb County, 56% of the vote or so, if they can just chip away at 1 or 2% there, and try to get some of those 70,000 people who didn't vote in the presidential election, it's Joe Biden's to lose.
And if you look at the dichotomy of that particular issue, I mean, don't forget that, it was a Republican governor, I mean, not a particularly popular one right now, Rick Snyder, who championed the Medicaid expansion and even got a lot of Republicans on board with that. I mean, that matters to people when they're looking at the possibility of losing that.
Particularly during a pandemic. Kathy,
Exactly.
You were wanting to say something?
Well, it's going to be all about the margins. I think about what's happening in Detroit, and there is such an enormous effort going on in Detroit to get the vote out, and it seems to be bearing fruit, because in 2016, I think there was more than 45,000 Detroiters who didn't vote at all.
Yep.
And they're definitely trying to get that. If you can get even half of those people to vote, then that makes up the margin that Trump won by in 2016. And I find it really interesting that instead of going to, doing events in downtown to Detroit or Midtown or something like that, that the Biden campaign is going into the neighborhoods. They went to a barbershop on 7 Mile. They went to, Kamala Harris went to the barbershop. Joe Biden went to the 7 Mile in Livernois and went to the shops there. Magic Johnson was in town on Saturday, and he was in a barbershop on the east side. And they're taking it to the neighborhoods, and it makes a difference with the people there, because when you have an event in downtown Detroit or something like that, you're going to get a lot of suburbanites to come down for it. But at these events, they've got Detroit people coming out, and I think that could make a big difference.
I remember. Yeah, go ahead, Chad.
Friday before the election in 2016, Kathy and I were both covering Hillary Clinton's rally in Shed 3 in Eastern Market. It was a sea of white people.
Well, I was going to remember in 2016, Obama, the Monday before the election in Ann Arbor, and all of us sort of scratching our heads going, you've got the Ann Arbor vote, look for Detroit. Rick, I want to move past a little sort of the guessing game and talk about election day.
Talking to the wrong person.
And after. You and I have talked a lot about this, and you have talked to a lot of smart people about this. And I think there is a concern among many, whether you are a Democrat or a Republican or however you see yourself in whatever party, about safety surrounding the election and after. And so Barbara O'Kelly asks, have you heard any chatter or other sources about possible disruptions in Michigan after the election, she asks. And she says, if Trump doesn't win, but I'd like to open it up about no matter what, and just sort of where we find ourselves in 2020 and some of the concerns that you're hearing from folks on the ground.
I guess I'll just go to two things, and I will try to be quick about it. That yes, there are concerns about that, and there are academics that I've talked to at multiple universities, people who used to work in the national security apparatus, who say that, there are concerns that the results of the election will be questioned regardless of who wins, although there's definitely a leaning more towards, the questioning if Joe Biden wins. And one of the factors in that is whether or not it will be a big win or a slim win. And another one, and this is really significant, is how quickly these races will be called. We're used to knowing the results of the election on election night. And that's not going to be the case. And this might be a weird one. And full disclosure, I have been messaging with NPR's Texas correspondent, Wade Goodwin, about this, that Texas is a red state that's leaning red, but is considered in play, and it counts its votes early enough that we could, in fact, know the results of the presidential race in Texas on election night. And I'm just kind of wondering how, if we do know that Texas is a big deal, that if Republicans lose Texas, then that's kind of the game. And if that's the case, then what are we going to see in terms of the reaction in the streets in swing states like Michigan and Wisconsin, where the votes are still being tallied and races will not be called?
Well, I spoke with a Republican in Oakland County, Waterford, who that day had gone and done 3.5 hours of gun training, target shooting, because he's worried that, that people are going to hit the streets if Trump wins again. And they're going to come to Waterford and they're going to, take over. When I was up in the UP, I had several people tell me that they're just waiting for a civil war to happen. So I think that there is a lot of talk about that. Whether or not it materializes is a different thing. But people are freaking out. I had a Democratic woman ask me the other day, should I buy a gun? And the whole thing is just crazy.
Well, to follow up with that, gun sales have been through the roof this year, starting with the pandemic and sort of, reaction, to people's reaction to the government telling them to stay home and shutting them out of their jobs. Just 2 nights ago, I was in the Home Depot parking lot in Roseville, and there was a handmade sign for someone advertising ammunition for sale. And I've never seen that before anywhere, much less even in the suburbs of Detroit or up north for that matter too. So there is definitely that element of tension in the background. You just cannot dismiss it whatsoever. I mean, and it definitely cleared up a little bit this week with the Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson ordering no guns in polling locations, no concealed weapons, and some gun groups threatening to go to court over that. And so we've got a lot of different variables right now. As far as the counting of the ballots, people have to understand the mechanics of this. To take an absentee ballot that comes in the mail or is dropped off, it has to be cut open. Now, most of the big cities, they have automatic letter cutters that cut them open in mass. But a lot of the small towns, they just cut them open like an old letter opener. And then it has to be checked. They have to check the ballot, verify that it has the signature, the right voters, the right correct number against the voter rolls. It's a very much more laborious, intensive. Each one has a couple minutes almost attached to it, versus when you go to the polls and you just put it up in the machine and it goes in and it's tabulated. And so that alone, you just double the number of absentee ballots easily from 1.2 million in 2016 to easily 2.4, if not 3 million. You're just naturally going to take more time. And so the legislature did give clerks 10 additional hours on Monday the 2nd, but only for cities over 25,000. And kind of interestingly, some of the biggest cities in the state opted out. So Warren, Sterling Heights, number 3, number 4, Canton Township, number 10, largest municipality in the state, decided not to do this. And so those are key cities to decide to vote, not to least to mention Grand Rapids and Detroit and Flint and Saginaw and Lansing, and how fast their ballots get counted. But it's to Rick's point, if you're expecting ballots before 11 p.m. or election results, you won't get them. The other thing, just one last thing, exit polls, I don't know what the networks are doing, but they should not exit poll in Michigan.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, how would you exit poll?
Well, because you're going to miss 2/3 of the voters who
Yeah.
half of which have already voted today. And so exit polls, if you see an exit poll on election night, 8 o'clock out of Michigan, just change the channel.
Just
Well,
keep Michigan radio on instead. Yeah. Kathy, go
one
ahead.
thing to remember is that, communities are going to be counting absentee ballots all day long. So hopefully they'll be done with a good portion of them by 8 o'clock. And I think that there are some communities that would like to be able to say, with 50% of the absentee ballots counted, this is the result we've got. I have a feeling that they're not going to be allowed to do that. So, they're going to have to wait to announce the absentee ballot results until every single absentee ballot is counted. And that could certainly be Wednesday, Thursday. Jocelyn Benson is even saying Friday.
Friday. Yeah.
So,
So let's dig into some other specific statewide races here, because I feel like we could probably talk about this presidential race and the outcome and the consequences of for at least another hour. So let's move to a question about the U.S. Senate race. Kathy, let's go to you. Susan Marie says, can you please talk a bit about the U.S. Senate race? Why is Michigan suddenly in play, and what issues are driving this race closer? So this, of course, is Democratic incumbent Gary Peters and a Republican challenger, yet again, not against Gary Peters, but part two for John James, businessman John James.
this race is closer than expected. It's been running from the New York Times poll, had it a 1-point race with Peters ahead. I think that might be a bit of an outlier. Other polls have had that up, Peters up by 5 or 6 points. But think about the money that's been spent in this Senate race. The advertising is ubiquitous. You can't go for 2 minutes without seeing an ad for one or the other. Healthcare is a huge issue in this race. And Gary Peters' relative, he's not particularly well known in the state, which is odd because it feels like he's been around forever, which he's been in politics for 30 years. But this is his first statewide office. So as a freshman senator, he's facing a harder time than a lot of people expected.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, just to follow up on Peters, he won this U.S. Senate seat that was long held for 30 some odd years by Carl Levin. He won it against Terry Lynn Land, who I think I can objectively say was one of the more lousier Republican candidates for the U.S. Senate in a long time, and just did a whole lot of bad things. And Peters, he won while Rick Snyder was winning re-election, and now he's actually having to fight for it. And that's why you see a lot of Gary Peters, on his motorcycle, on camera. He talked about this deeply personal story of his past wife's abortion, and then you see John James, young, attractive African-American Republican with deep history or background of being both in the military and a businessman. Gary Peters also was in the military, but doesn't emphasize it nearly as much as John James does. So James is trying to appeal and cut into this vote. James has run away a little bit from Donald Trump. He has not been a 110% Trump supporter like he was in years past, and so he's taken a different strategy in this one, because he lost by 6 points or so to Debbie Stabenow. He got closer than people thought he would, but he still he clung to President Trump a lot harder in 2018.
Well, John James has actually been, he's engaged in an interesting sort of dance and probably a smart one for the campaign that he has to run, which is that he's got to pull out the Trump base. And so he said, was it 110% Donald Trump? Do I have that right?
2000.
It was 2000.
2000%.
Yeah, Chad said 110, and it was Yeah, it's
It was like,
2,000%
what? Where are your
behind.
numbers coming? 2,000% Donald Trump, but then at the same time also saying that he's not there for anyone, that he's going to only represent Michigan. And at some point it becomes a this or that, especially in a state that's pretty marginal when it comes to who they want for president.
Okay, you three, stick with me. I'm going to put out a theory. and call me on it if you think this is just bonkers. But here's what I think.
Bonkers.
Okay, this is the time when the panelists go get another drink while I do this. But so here's my question. There does seem to be a number of Republicans that we all talk to regularly as, sources, or who have already made it very clear, let's say on Facebook or Twitter. I'm thinking some who are part of the Lincoln Project, for example. These are Republicans, even kind of like a Rick Snyder Republican, right? Who continue to say we are Republicans, but we cannot vote for Trump. Instead, we are voting for Biden. I have this theory that I actually wonder if those folks don't then go and split their ticket, right? So that they vote for Biden because they simply cannot vote for Trump, but then actually split, for Senate and then vote for John James. And could we actually see a higher level of ticket splitting here, even maybe among independents who would normally maybe have voted for a Romney or a McCain, simply cannot vote for Trump though, but instead go, but I am going to vote for John James to send someone to the Senate. Do you think there's some kind of relevancy there in play? Rick looks like so I got a thumbs down from Rick. Well, because, we're married, so what's mine is yours. So that's your thought too. So
right. So, well, I'm sorry. Apparently that doesn't come in terms of opinion and analysis. And I know you're just throwing the thought out there. If I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that sort of ticket splitting. I just don't think that it will happen at the U.S. Senate.
The scale
at the statewide level. And we're already seeing evidence of that in terms of public opinion polling and statewide candidate strategy, that there is, we're starting to see a certain amount of separation from Donald Trump going, right down to congressional races. I just don't know, the lower you get on the ballot, the more fealty to the national ticket, which means Donald Trump, will matter, because that's where the GOTV, the get out the vote machine will matter. So we don't know how that matters and what that means, again, as all of us have said, in this particular environment when we don't know how get out the vote operations will actually work and which ones will succeed.
Yeah.
Well, this is totally anecdotal, but I live in Oakland County and I have seen a lot of yard signs for John James that don't have Trump signs that go along with it. And yard signs aren't a great indication, but it's one thing that it's certainly something that I've noticed a lot of. But look at John James and the way that he's dealt with Donald Trump. He spoke in Freeland when Donald Trump was in Freeland, but it was 2 hours before Trump got there. And by the time Trump got there, he was long gone. And he didn't even show up in Muskegon, wasn't there at all. So he doesn't want to have pictures out there with him. And I was at an event with John James on last Friday, and he called himself a nonpartisan. And, he doesn't have a Republican message. He doesn't have a Democratic message. He's a nonpartisan. And, I thought that was a very interesting strategy that he used.
But here's the thing, John James doesn't have a message that's very concrete or discernible. When he was on Flashpoint, Devin Scillian said, "What is your healthcare plan?" and he talked in a whole bunch of circles about healthcare. And for a guy who runs a business, he runs a transportation logistics company in Southwest Detroit that his father founded. He probably knows a few things about paying healthcare bills. I'm certain of it. And yet he just has not taken a position on a range of things. He hasn't taken a lot of questions. He's been given very few interviews, and when you do get an interview with him, it is a whole lot of platitudes. Now, I don't think I have to agree with Rick. I just don't think there's a big, huge secret Lincoln Project cabal out there that's going to, there's only a small number of real Rick Snyder sycophants, to be honest.
That number would be 0.
And so I just don't see that there's enough people to be really a groundswell. I'm going to vote down Trump, but I'm going to get John James in there.
Right.
If there was, we would have seen a campaign for it by now, saying, hey, if Trump's going down, we need John James in the U.S. Senate to be a check on Joe Biden. We haven't heard that argument whatsoever yet.
Well, because John James is a resume candidate, he's not a message or a platform candidate. That you tell me, I mean, go out and ask anyone who's aware that there's a Senate race what John James stands for. And if they're not, like a paid Republican Party staffer, I don't think they would know.
Well, I think we have a lot of smart viewers right now who listen to Michigan radio who do know the Senate race. I do want to say, just talking about the signs very quickly, Kathy, we had the same thing actually up north, driving sort of, like not in Traverse City, but Antrim County and things like that. Whereas 4 years ago, just miles and miles and hills of Trump signs, and not just not seeing Trump signs, but actually seeing some Biden signs, which
and sometimes in the same yard
there. Yeah, right. But anyway,
we were driving back and we saw that.
Yeah, I want to give Susan Rose the comment who says, FYI, our indivisible group in Lansing, or in Livingston, sorry, this was because it goes back to Livingston group, has over 1,000 members. Brighton is plastered with Democrat candidate signs like I've never seen before. So I think that goes back to that. So we touched on the U.S. Senate. Let's talk about some of the congressional districts and congressional races. So there's definitely the 8th and the 11th, Alyssa Slotkin, Haley Stevens, the incumbents who both won just 2 years ago. So the freshman Democratic women who won is sort of part of the blue wave or the pink wave, which I just think is the silliest thing to call it because it was sort of this year of the women. But Greg says, are there any particular House races you'll be paying attention to this November, particularly? Chad, let's start with you. He says, as an example, the seat vacated by Justin Amash. Give us a quick little rundown about the 3rd Congressional District without Congressman Amash running anymore.
Well, you're testing me on that one. I am not paying a whole lot of attention.
Well, there is a Meyer who is running as a Republican. Or Kathy, you want to jump in?
That's actually a good race. It just got moved today from lean Republican to toss-up by, I think it was the Cook Political Report. And that is Hillary Schulten, an attorney in Grand Rapids, versus
Peter Meyer.
Peter Meyer.
Peter Meyer, yeah.
Peter Meyer was at the same event that John James was at, that I was at last week. And, he's a military veteran too. So he's certainly putting that message out there. He's got a ton of money behind him. Yeah. Hillary Schulten has raised a ton of money too. And, Kent County went for Gretchen Whitmer in 2018 after narrowly going for Trump in 2016. Yeah. Kent County is definitely changing a bit. Now, the exurbs around Grand Rapids are probably a different story, but that is turning into a good race.
Mm. Well, I mean, Grand Rapids, the city itself, does send Democrats to the legislature. I was just trying to look it up and I couldn't find it, but Cooks has, the rankings, and the Amash district is one of the more naturally Republican districts. And if that one is within reach of the Democrats, then that means Democrats are on the ascent, at least in this election cycle, and Republicans are in trouble. And by the way, I mean, the Meyer name, because of the retail chain, is just a big natural name identification advantage in that part of the state.
Yeah, if Hillary Scholten can possibly pull off an upset here, then I would look south to John Holdley, the Democrat,
The
in the
6th Congressional District.
against
Yeah.
a longtime congressman. That will be a potential place to look for upsets. If there is just a landslide Biden victory, you start looking at, down ballot areas, and you could see some Republican congressmen go down.
Mm-hmm. Which immediately sets the stage for election, 22 and 24, and all of these people who will have to defend seats that typically they would not be able to win absent some kind of a landslide.
It is pretty fascinating when you look at the 8th Congressional District, who is run by Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin, who
Kind of the West Bank of Michigan politics that just keeps changing hands.
It's absolutely fascinating that I would say back in February or March, Kathy, it really did seem like it was a true toss-up. I mean, it was in the top, there's really only so many actual toss-ups with how maps are drawn in Michigan, but even nationwide, I think it was really considered only one of 35 true toss-ups, right, in the country. It's pretty fascinating how in a few short, 7-8 months, that race really went from a true toss-up to really, you say the name Paul Young, and unless maybe you're in Livingston County or parts of Oakland, it's pretty fascinating. Kind of tells the tale, of just sort of politics in 2020 and how drastically things can change.
Well, and they just couldn't attract a top tier candidate to that race.
Right.
So they've got Paul Young, who's an attorney, who worked in the Trump administration, who is also used to be a news anchor. And he's got some money. He's kicked in, almost $600,000 into his race, and has raised, I think it's about a total of about 1.3 million. And but Alyssa Slotkin has raised 8 million, and she works really hard. And she came pretty close in Oakland County, won very broadly in Ingham County. And Livingston County, she lost pretty big in Livingston County, but she has come across as a moderate in that district, which you have to be. And she took a lot of heat for her vote to impeach the president, but it happened so long ago that I think that people have almost forgotten about it. Nobody's talking about impeachment now. But I think that she's on pretty solid ground there. But she, I've done a couple of campaign events with her, or covered a couple of campaign events, and she's working it hard.
Yeah. There was also a question within that same asking about Justin Amash. So Kathy, I'm going to just give this to you really quick because this is you're the closest in terms of, but wondering also about the Rashida Tlaib seat. Is there even a Republican who is running this year against Rashida Tlaib? Give us a little rundown about that congressional district.
The guy's name is, I think, Dudenheimer. And he goes by the dude, but
as well he should.
Yeah, absolutely.
Active on Facebook.
Okay.
Very, but that is such a Democratic district that there's absolutely no way.
Plus 15 district, I think. D15, D16, something like that.
Yeah.
She's gonna get 70% of the vote there.
Easily.
The story looking at the 11th Congressional District with Haley Stevens up for election against this Eric Shockey, thank you. This is a district that has changed immensely. This was a Rock River Republican district. Joel Nolenberg represented this district. Thad McCotter represented this district before his people spoiled his
Carrie Benevolio.
Carrie Benevolio was elected to this district, the infamous Milford reindeer farmer. And so here you have, and in a traditional country club Republican, and Dave Trott was elected to this district and decided he had had enough of Trumpism, and he just quit and decided to just go back to making money in the private sector. And so Stevens comes in and wins this seat. She won a big contentious primary, and this district, Western Wayne County, and jagged parts of southeast Oakland County, this is part of that demographic change. And also it's just really where Democrats are gaining seats both in the, and have gained seats in the state house, the state Senate. They're defending a state house seat in Livonia right now. They're defending a state house seat in Plymouth as well. And so this is really where, this is ground zero for the Democrats right now, because in order to keep their gains, they got to defend those seats, and Slotkin is kind of at the center of all that.
Well, let's just very quickly,
Stevens, sorry.
Right. Let's very quickly tick through, because there's just a few more questions about a couple races. I will take this one from Peter. How about the 12th district? Debbie Dingell. This is, I mean,
Right.
you know, there's some parts of Washtenaw County, maybe, you know, downriver, who, you know, what Debbie Dingell herself, the congresswoman who represents the 12th, talks about, which is sort of these union voters, right, who are angry at the Democrats who voted for Trump in 16, but this is Dingell territory for the time being. But I will talk.
She's got name ID. She won't be outworked. She won't be out fundraised, and you know, that's a tough haul for.
But Kathy, do you want to talk about her primary? Is that what you're interested in, or no? Go ahead. Yeah.
What I want to talk about is 2022. That because that district's going to get redrawn.
Yeah.
And that's going to become a really interesting race once that's a new district, because she had a primary on the left.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if that becomes more of a Washtenaw County type district, then, you know, all bets are going to be off.
Well, we saw the same thing with John Dingell and Lynn Rivers the last time that same kind of district was redrawn. Absolutely. And of course, all of the congressional maps will be redrawn, not just that one. And that is fascinating.
And when we look at districts that Democrats win by 70%, or Republicans for that matter, that the reason that happens is because there was a Republican strategist who, when they were drawing those districts in the majority, called it Democratic garbage. That what they do is it's called a cracking, and the idea is that you take as many of the other side's voters as you can and just push them into one particular area so that more districts are competitive or marginally in in your favor. And Republicans have done it right now because they've had the advantage, but Democrats have also done it historically, going back decades. But I mean, redistricting could be big changes, a lot of them unexpected.
Yes, statewide too, which I want to get to. We're getting quite a few questions about the state house, but very quickly, just because we're on a roll with the congressional districts, Susan is wondering about the Wahlberg-Driscoll race. I think I'm happy to just do a very quick top line, which I think this has always been sort of Wahlberg's since he won it in 2010, back from Mark Schauer in 2008 when he originally won it in a really contentious primary in 2006. It was sort of the first time a Republican primaried a fellow Republican in Joe Schwartz. I think it's that same kind of race though, but guys, correct me if you think I'm wrong, that the Wahlberg-Driscoll really is Wahlberg's, and that's because how the district is drawn. But if we do see a Democratic wave, like we were talking about, where a John Headley could win in the 6th, or the 3rd doesn't go, I mean, that could be one to watch, the 7th there, but Wahlberg has a lot of supporters in that district. And of course, this is to the west of Ann Arbor.
And there's a characteristic of incumbents who lose, that when they come back, that they work very, very hard. Wahlberg was a super right Republican back before it was, before it was cool, that he's got to rely. I'm not saying that if Trump loses, he loses, but he's got to rely an awful lot on some headwinds from Trump Republicans or Trump loyalists who still get out to the polls. But I mean, that district is a race, and he knows.
Yeah. Okay, let's dig in to the state house races. So in our final few minutes that we have here, the entire state house is up for election. Happens every 2 years, just like the congressional races in DC and our congressional delegation. The state Senate, though, is on a 4-year cycle, so they are not up for re-election, but the state house is. Right now, of course, we've got Gretchen Whitmer, Democrat, as governor, but she works or deals with, depending on the day, 2 chambers, both led by Republican majorities, although has gotten smaller Republican majorities since 18, certainly. But there's quite a few questions, so I'm not going to read all of them, and I'll just put it into one. What is the likelihood that the state house could flip to Democratic control this year? Flip ball, who wants it first?
It could. The Democrats need what, 4 seats, I think, to flip it, 4 or 5. And there are 3 seats in Oakland County, which are being targeted as flips. There's a seat over in Battle Creek area that Democrats are looking to flip. There's a seat up in Traverse City that is pretty competitive. But you know, Democrats are also defending a seat in Bay City. Bay City flipped from Democrat to Republican in 2016, and Brian Elder up there, they're definitely defending that seat hard, and that's a hard one. So it's going to come down to, you know, the narrowest of margins, and that unless, you know, I had a Republican pollster tell me that Oakland County is going to be a bloodbath for Republicans. And if that's the case, there could be 3 seats in Oakland County alone that flip. And then that makes it easier.
In a typical year, advantage Republicans, but this is not a typical year. And when you look outside the Trump motivations, which exist on both sides, that Trump supporters are very motivated, but so are Trump opponents, very, very motivated. And that's regardless of who they're looking to vote, looking to vote for. And Lansing Democrats would dearly love to change the dynamic from a House and Senate that's Republican against a governor who's a Democrat to a House Democratic majority working with a Democratic governor against a lone Republican majority in the Senate.
And the politics right now as it relates to the coronavirus pandemic, and the Democrats are using this right now to go around the state and say, put this guy Mike Shirkey, the Senate Majority Leader, up on display and say, we need you to help us counter him for the next 2 years. It's pretty vital to Governor Whitmer's reelection, for sure, and also just her ability to do anything for the next 2 years. It is a 58-52 House right now, and so Democrats need 4 seats to go to 56 1-seat majority, or you get a scenario where you win all 3 seats in Oakland County in the bloodbath, and Republicans hold their own, and Democrats hold their own in the rest of the state. Then you have 55-55 tie, and we have shared power, and that would be a wild ride.
And Rick Pluta literally starts just like jumping up and down. Rick, do you want to quickly explain shared power? Because Zach Gorchow of the Gongwer News Service, who everyone should read, recently wrote about his own excitement. And of course, we're not trying to make light of the fact that politics is incredibly serious
That
and
there are
important
stakes at play.
for,
Yeah.
and that there are, but there is this idea of shared power because there are 110 state house seats, and that when it has happened before, it gets split 50-50. We had a time like Camelot.
55-55.
Kidding. 55-55 that was shared power. Rick, do you want to talk
The
a little
first
bit about
thing-
that in the 90s?
I will be as succinct as I can. The first thing that happens is that both parties go about trying to flip someone, because it only takes one. And they will offer everyone, the moon and the stars. The only thing is, and this is what happened the last time around, is that as the stakes grew higher, the leadership on both sides started going, well, how badly do we want a 56-54 majority where all of a sudden everyone becomes the power player, that every single legislator on every single issue starts going, give me everything I want else, or I switch. Kathy, you remember this, because I mean, Oakland County was huge in that. And so everyone becomes a power player. So all of a sudden, the idea of the fact that leadership exists becomes an anachronism. And so at that point, the leadership starts to deal. And I'm making an assumption that it plays out the same way again. And you start to bargain. And what happened with split power the last time, and again, this is when Kathy and I were working together. She was my editor for part of that, but somehow we lived through that.
Yeah.
And you start bargaining over things like that there's a speaker during one part of the session and then another speaker during the other part, that committee chairs are split back and forth with the gavel going back and forth, that there are momentary power plays, but they've got to be accomplished without permanent hard feelings. And shared power in the Michigan House was considered a historic accomplishment, including revamping the way that Michigan funds schools, which was a controversy that had been lingering for decades and decades and decades.
And it's a controversy that's been lingering for decades since then.
Yes.
No, but I think there is this really interesting moment in time, and I'd like to leave it at that note, right? That I think all of us at some point, he's passed away since, but Speaker at the time, Speaker Paul Hilligans, who is still alive, talk a lot about what that was like to have to compromise. And I think there's something to be said about that, and kind of leaving it this evening on that moment after talking a lot about contentious politics and sort of both sides going at each other and feeling like at times we can't even have civil discussions. Hearing those stories from that time about being made to compromise to actually get things done is something pretty intriguing. Whether or not 25 years later, the policy might not be as fresh as it seemed back in the 90s.
If only.
You're right. I think that's how a lot of folks feel.
That after shared power was done, that there was this idea that, well, maybe we should make this permanent.
Right.
When his majority was restored, it was nah.
Shocking.
Nope, thank you.
Well, Chad Livengood, Kathy Gray, Rick Pluta, I want to thank you all so much. I want to mostly thank everyone who has stayed with us to watch and to view. For everyone who submitted questions that we didn't get to answer, I am so sorry. And there were, I do want to say, a couple of very specific questions about ballots and some questions about where to drop them off, about how to be sure that your absentee ballot was received. Here's what I'd love to do. I'll say it slowly. I'll also put it in the chat. Please, if you have individual questions about your ballots, I'm going to give you an email address to email, and I will make sure that we answer your questions directly, just because we don't have time to do it and we need to look up precincts. But if you email Michigan Radio, so all one word, Michigan Radio, at UMich, UMICH for University of Michigan.edu. I will make sure that we've got someone in our newsroom to respond to all of those questions, because the most important thing you can do, no matter whom you're voting for, is to vote this election year. So again, I will put that in the Q&A. Yeah, go ahead,
Just real
Jen.
quick, the Michigan Secretary of
Please.
State's office, on their website in the Michigan Election Center, they have a absentee ballot tracking feature that once a clerk has received it, they scan the ballot in the envelope, and they've made a record that they have received it. So you can go on to the Michigan Election Center on the Secretary of State's website and look your name up and try to.
They can even let you know, yeah.
Rick and I, in fact, just did that 2 days ago, I think, to make sure. So, and yes, it is now in the, so thank you to whoever put that in. Again, the email, michiganradio@umich.edu. Feel free to email and we'll make sure someone gets back to you directly. For the time being, everyone, take a deep breath. We are less than 2 weeks there.
Woohoo!
I truly believe, not to be Pollyanna-ish, that this is a society that is based on good and kindness, and that we will all get through this period of time and the pandemic. And I cannot wait to actually get to toast all of you post-pandemic. It's going to be, as Rick Pluta says, like the real, literal roaring 20s. And the first Issues and Ales back, Steve Krupinski, you'll have to put it in an arena or something so we can have it big enough to have everybody. So thank you, everyone. Have a good, safe night, and be healthy. Cheers, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.